I'm Nancy Giordano, thrilled to be with Sarah DaVanzo as we launch into another Femme Futurist interview. And they're not really interviews, they're really conversations, right? As we
Yeah.
get to explore each other's world and work and get to know more about how we got to where we are and what we're passionate and curious about and what we're trying to make happen in the world right now as we go. And so thank you, Sarah, for jumping in and saying yes to our invitation. I think
It's a pleasure. It's fun. This is going to be a fun conversation.
It is. I know we always want to pretend like we're in a bar somewhere with a great glass of wine, or over lunch in some pretty cafe,
Or a shot of tequila.
So, yeah, there we go. That would be an even more fascinating conversation. Especially, the part that I'm excited about is I was looking through your background. You have woven in and out of communications agencies, your own consultancy, the research work, the entrepreneurial things that you've started, and corporate life. And so you've had this great zigzag. So currently, you are titled, if we want to put titles on things, VP Consumer Insights, Foresight, and Innovation. So it's interesting that those are all put into the same house for L'Oreal. And but you also have this wonderful description I love again on LinkedIn. You make it broader than that about being a cultural cartographer, a curiosity coach, and an insight scientist, which is the part that I am so fascinated by, because as I was learning more about your work and the way that you collect data and analyze data and really use that to inform the work that you do. My approach is so much more intuitive. And somehow we end up in the same spot, which is always the part that's fascinating to me about how we can bring different intelligences to what it is that we're observing and experiencing. But do you want to take us through the quick career journey? Because I think it's always fascinating.
Well, first of all, I have to agree with you that, cognitive diversity for me is like the moment du jour. And so we'll talk about curiosity in a little bit, but having different styles and methods and foresight is critical to the industry, to come at it from different directions. And of course, to have the female gaze for the first time, but also opening the aperture to other forms of different perspectives and diversity within this field, which I share your passion for some time now, that there's been, myopia and our futures. If we think about the world being designed by just dogs, but there are cats and there are birds and there are insects and there are other kinds of things in the world that, just the dogs can't understand and design. So this is fabulous to be here. And I'd be happy to share some of the methodologies about like how I got to where I am today and what's happened.
Yeah, take us on a bit of a story tour. So like for 5 minutes or so or whatever long.
Sure.
But just, my guess is, right, you're very curiosity led,
Sure.
which has moved you from place to place. But I think it's curious to see again, like sort of what you studied or how you decided that this was your work. Take us through your journey.
I think curiosity as a young child, I think that often comes out of trying to make one's own way, right? And we moved around a lot as a child for my parents' work. And then, curiously, I decided to leave America at the age of 23 and live abroad for 20 years, working in 22 countries over 20 years, right? And so my parents were like, what did we make? What did we create? I'm very close with them, but they did nothing but give me the launch pad or the air beneath my wings to explore. And I think having to, at first in my growing up, I was forced to navigate and be very culturally sensitive. And I think that's what you see in the kind of the banner of my LinkedIn, if you will, the, culture cartographer. I've been, kind of under that moniker for about almost 20 years now. But the reality is that understanding culture as a way into, and what I mean by culture, let's just be real clear. We have pop culture, we have multicultural, we have corporate culture, right? And we have arts and culture. Just real clear, culture includes all of that, right? Yeah. And so being in the space of having to navigate countries and I was mostly in emerging markets. And I think that kind of put up my radar, to be able to sense trends, sense trouble, see the patterns. And then, of course, for my own livelihood or the livelihood of the businesses that I was running or the brands I was running, what's the future and seeing very quickly, in emerging markets, the world changes very rapidly. And in some ways, I feel a little prepared for what we're going through right now. And I'm very upset, as we all are, very anxious. But I do have to say, it's been all these years of being in emerging markets and having to basically zig when others were zagging and pivoting and, kind of moving with the rapid change of development and crisis, a lot of crisis. I think prepared myself, and I'm sure others who are in a similar vein, for these changes that we're going through right now with, the market. So, I was more of a cultural cartographer that then led me into the trends and cultural intelligence or cultural strategy world in marketing. And then that is often applied to short-term marketing. I've got a product in the next year or two that I'm going to brand. And so that tends to be shorter terms. And as I was, doing much more entrenched in the trend space, and that was probably in my South Africa decade, that was probably really got into trends, mostly as related to gold trends, because gold focused in on fashion, science, money, economics, culture, so gold was a really kind of a great topic, which I was marketing for South Africa. And so I had to all of a sudden get skills in these spaces. So I, worked with people who are experts and learned lots of tricks and tools. But the more short-term work, then it started to evolve into what's the long vision, what's the long futures. And that's where I had to then read books and take online courses and study methodology to be able to, with accuracy and with, for me, data and the technologies that I use to try to be able to project the future. So that kind of got me to that space. And the sweet spot of all this, if you want to kind of think of it as like a Venn diagram, is I've always been in the technology world for all my life. Just interested in it and, following emerging tech and inventing it. I have a couple patents. But the reality is that I also have been very much focused on innovation. So I think where the role I'm in right now is applying the insight skills, the foresight and futurism skills, the cultural skills, and applying that to innovation.
And the technical skills. I actually really am fascinated. I love the way you just said, I've got a couple of patents into the, like a parent.
I'm sorry, that sounded
That's
obnoxious.
Extraordinary.
That sounded obnoxious, didn't it?
No,
I feel that, we, especially now with the price, the change of life, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And actually, this is a great opportunity for especially women in foresight, because, boy, the foresight industry needs tools, needs methods, needs technologies that are dedicated, in new ways, and female brains on all of that to basically improve the craft, if I want to call it the craft work of foresight. And I don't know, I think so. Everyone's onto AI. I've been using two fabulous artificial intelligence platforms that are used for the government, for defense and for counterterrorism work and stuff. But what they do is they look at the emotion of the intent of the communication through a whole different series of modes with a very high degree of accuracy. And so, looking at even just, for example, recently I interviewed 21 futurists on the future of insight. It's a pet project.
Yeah.
And I was able to take the text of the futurists on their vision of the future of insight and feed it through the emotion recognition to understand where they were coming from and what were some underlying feelings. And I did a similar thing for looking at professional insights people and what their view was. And it's all going to be published sometime in the next month or so. So stay tuned for that.
I can't wait. I just want to know, are we optimistic on a whole, or are we not?
You can't. I don't think it's a blanket optimism. I think there are so many fabulous white spaces and opportunity to positive dynamics that are in place right now, and the data is showing that. And there are some big, hairy, wicked problems. But a couple things. One is this moment has been like a time travel machine. Yeah. It's like I've been Star Trek transporter, like to 2030. So I've been involved in a couple of pieces of big work on visioning for 2030 for my job at L'Oreal and outside, for nonprofits and so forth. So I've been very much in the world of 2030 for a while. And what's fascinating is that many of them, over 20 different discrete trends that were all like, this is the world of 2030, are happening right now. It's just been accelerated at the moment. And that's a good thing. So now that leaves white space for another leapfrog between now and the next 9 years, right? That's one thing. The other thing
I was going to say, and actually, that's a really cool thing, because I've been guessing that we were at least 5 years ahead, but I wasn't quite sure how much further. And so now you have evidence, quote unquote.
Oh yeah, no. So did I tell you about that project that I'm doing? It's a side project with my friend where we've taken 120 trend reports that are published not by us, by third parties, very reputable. I mean, the industry standards of foresight, right? In terms of, like McKinsey might have something, a Rand Corporation or Forrester Group for Technology and so forth. And what we did was we didn't editorialize it. We just aggregated everything and said, what are they all talking about? Is there, out of 120 reports, is there any agreement, and where are they agreeing? And a couple of things. One, there's a lot of bias in our industry, and we need more female voices. So what was disturbing was that there was a lack of even talking about, even discussing topics like educational trends in the year 2030, beyond the obvious, which is, everyone's going to be remote education. Nothing beyond that, like no other transformations. Ironically, there was nothing on sports other than esports and drone racing.
Wow.
Like sports is going to be non-existent. So I find it interesting. The authors and the publishers take a viewpoint of what they find to be important topics, and then talk about it and research it and give the data. And then there's all these holes, like it's a Swiss cheese of culture that are not dealt with. And that's, I think, having diversity of brains, it will be like, hey, like what, like we haven't even, scraped the surface of so many topics. What about pets? And things. So so I don't know. I mean, the viewpoint is that I think where looking at the trends in this way, it certainly highlights gaps in the marketplace.
Well, and to your point, you've got this time travel thing that gets you at least 10 years to the future, which is sort of now, and then where does we go next? I'm working on a project now where we were looking at 2050. We had the hubris to think that we could look at the future in 2050.
That. That's more imagination. That's sci-fi. Right? That's fun. That's still fun.
You're looking at trajectories, right? Where we're really looking for our trajectories and saying what are the things that are driving that. And I think that one of the key parts of being a really reliable, or if you will, trustworthy futurist / foresight / whatever, is being able to synthesize things. Because I think often we put these things in silos and we don't see that this is related to this, is related to this. And actually when you hook them together, it's actually pretty clear, where it is that we're heading and what might be possible as we move ahead, or what we might need to watch out for as we go forward. So I am super excited about your synthesize, like the IBM Watson of foresight. I am thrilled to see.
It would be fun to see it. But to your point about synthesis, that's a really big idea, because we've placed a lot of import on data analytics. And believe me, we do data analytics. I have teams. I used to run teams. Like, the point is that that's very important to the work in some methodologies. Okay, not everyone's. But this is the skill that's missing. I've just kind of thought about we need to teach synthesis skills, so that people can take disparate information and the methods of scanning and identifying the ways that you parse through the information and layer it. And if the tools that could be built could be those that help with synthesis and synthesis skills. I don't think it's as easy as just sitting down and reading everything and figure it out. There's a method to it. What's your method?
Well, there's a method, but there's also a brain function. So there's a guy named David Dow, who's an organizational development person who wrote an article for World Future Society magazine. You and I have talked about that group before. And that magazine was a really dry magazine, and not all the articles were super great, but this one was a really good one. And it was about the need for synthesizers, or synthesis, as he described it. Oh, cool. And what he found was that there are natural bridge builders who are able to say, hey, Sarah, do you know what Nancy's doing? And Nancy, do you know what Mark's doing? Mark, do you know what Jose is doing? And on teams would be the person who would facilitate this kind of knowledge sharing amongst the group. And what was fascinating to him, this is where curiosity comes in. It wasn't so much that those groups had better performance than other groups, which was also interesting, but he was trying to figure out why someone would do that when the people on the team got agitated, their bosses didn't encourage them to do that. There was no external validation or motivation for someone to be that kind of thinker, and yet people did it anyway. And he was like, why would someone do that? And so he postulated that there were two types of brain reward. Those who love new information and being able to turn other people onto it, and those people who want new information to be able to master what it is that they're doing right now. And in David's estimation, 95% of people are focused on mastery, and only 5% of people are focused on new. right?
That's interesting. I'm going to look that article up.
I'll send it to you. I have a copy of it. So I've done a lot. So his whole point was, how do we expand that? Because the problem is, if you don't, like, mastery is great, but the problem is we have so much data. Again, like 90% of the world's data created in the last 2 years or whatever that crazy number is.
Right.
And so then we become more and more and more and more specialized. So doctor, oncologist, liquid tumors for children under 13. Right? And so you just start to become more and more specific, which means that if a child also presents, somebody's doing that also in orthopedics and somebody else is doing that in neurobiology, and a child presents with something that's going on with their leg and everyone's just looking at it through their little specialty view, right? And you need that person who's able to look across and be able to understand how these things might be related to or linked to or part of something that's a bigger systems thing, right? And no one's necessarily sorry?
Like a T-shaped person, right? T-shaped
Yeah,
people,
I always like the T and I and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
but it's about being able to look
so
at holistically. You know, at one point we were doing a big consulting thing with a big Fortune 100 or Fortune 50, whatever it was, company, and we were trying to come in and say, you know, you're used to allopathic solutions from a very discrete interventionist point of view from the world of McKinsey and wherever, and we come in it as like holistic, practitioners who are looking at this is related to this is related to this, and these things that when you then put the pressure point in someplace, it doesn't hurt something somewhere else, because that's always the big issue when you don't look at the system. Anyway, David wrote this great thing. He was trying to create the Society for Synthesists. I had some friends who were trying to create that at one point because they wanted to be almost like Mensa, but it was like you're a synthesist. And there was always this debate: can you train someone to be a better synthesist or not?
Yes,
well, you know what I realized from that, Sarah, the events that I created as a result of that sort of awareness was I need to create time for idea integration and for idea partly integration and partly questioning and curiosity. I mean, this goes back to the curiosity thing, right? I was part of a big leadership thing with a bunch of other women in Texas, and we went to all these various cities, and I would hear 5 different talks and be like, oh my God, that's fascinating. And my colleagues from Bell Helicopter or from an energy company or from a bank would go, I don't know what this has to do with my job on Monday. And so they would discount it as not being relevant. Right? So it's that capacity of getting people to say, you know what, you might be hearing a psychologist from Fort Benning or Fort Bliss tell you about PTSD and blah, 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 but that actually is really relevant to other things that are happening in your world. Right? Connecting those dots and teaching people or giving them time and tools and exercises.
I think experience, whether it's firsthand or whether it's through reading, whether it's travel or just putting yourself out there, I have to say I do believe exactly what you're saying, very much so. I'm very much preaching to the converted, because I think you have to have, even across categories, extraordinarily different angles. I like to hire people who have hobbies and have who come at things from different perspectives. And even in the insights world, it's not just foresight, it's insight, that when let's imagine you do a piece of research and you have some some conclusions. You say, here are my insights from this piece of research. If you get creative people with different minds and diversity in a room to look at those insights, they will put new things together into new combinations. And now all of a sudden you have such a more powerful output. And the same thing with foresight work. It was always, like you want to have a diverse output, whether it's, like I say, cognitive, age, gender, all that stuff. So, I think that's interesting. So I would certainly recommend people go and get as much diverse experience out of your comfort zone. It's almost like a roulette. Just pick, you know what I used to tell people? There's something called, of course there's meetups, but it's what is it called? It's Club Free Time. Clubfreetime.com. Okay, so you can go to clubfreetime.com. I'm not paid by Club Free Time, but it's not free. It's like $14. Okay, I don't know what they call that. You go, and they have them in most. They have them in most cities. Okay, so apparently you can go like Club Free Time, like Houston, or Club Free Time in Manhattan, or New York, or whatever. And so I'd go on there all the time and just be like, close and be like, okay, we're gonna go do this. But the thing is because it's like free, so it's cost like $14 or something to like an annual membership, but then the things that they do are usually free or $5. So you can just go, and if you don't like it, you can just walk out like at intermission or leave. And so I would tell people, if you're a little restricted and you're trying to like be an executive to reinvent and you're trying to push your curiosity muscles, like that's your assignment, is like basically close your eyes, pick a thing, go to it, go. You don't have to stay.
Right.
Didn't cost you anything.
Well, I love that it's experiential, right? Because I think the reason TED has grown in the whole online TED world, right? So I was literally technically the first TEDx licensee in the world, and one of the first 10 that created a TEDx event, because we wanted to bring that kind of TED thing into our community, so that we try and feed our communities, right? But I think the reason it has exploded is because it became a way for us to like hear a humanist next to a technologist, next to an artist, next to an whatever, tell us about how the world was going. And what I realized when I went to a first TED conference is that you're in a room full of N's, the people who want new, right? Not necessarily the people who want the mastery, but I do think that that's a way, but it's still just an intellectual thing. What you're talking about is the fact that people are actually going out there and doing something, which I think is actually that much richer, right?
Well, that feeds into the 4 styles of curiosity, right? People tend to think of curiosity being just intellectual, and that's just one mode. And that's actually, it's a passive mode, because it's less risky than actually going someplace and putting yourself potentially in harm's way or jumping out of an airplane. So the 4 modes of curiosity that which go, it's Jungian, and it goes back to kind of the modes of thinking and learning and so forth, is that, we have intellectual curiosity, we have observational curiosity, some people who are studiers, people who look at trends and patterns, visual. We have sensorial and feeling, people who feel things and from a standpoint of it's all about the sensory beyond just visual. And then we have the makers and the doers, right, who are going and traveling, who are going to a party where they know nobody, who are certainly making and experimenting and building. And we all have a little bit of it. So when you started this off to say, I don't know which one I am, good, because you should be a little bit of everything. You might be skewing at this time to one versus another. And what we have found.
I loved it because there's a TED talk that people can watch. We'll put a link to your TEDx Asbury Park talk. It's a great talk that describes it. It was actually 2 years ago yesterday. So congratulations on your anniversary. So I was going to ask you how things have shifted in 2 years, but I think that what's fascinating about the way you present that is it wasn't a fixed state. It was who you are today, right? How you're approaching things today, which I love, because I think that we also lock ourselves into, I'm that kind of thinker and I'm that kind of thing. And if we're really trying to be growth mindset oriented and be more fluid in the way that we learn and we take in information and be curious about, well, maybe there's another way to take in information and not feel like we're locked into it. I love the way you invited people into that.
Well, thank you. I think it's the way to phrase it is not. I hate the concept of be curious. I hate that. When I see that, I go crazy. I say do curious. Okay, do it. Meaning,
I'll have to change my hashtag.
Okay, no, but I'm sorry, but the reality is that it's how can you just be it? You need to do it in that respect. And the thinking here is that I would like to be encouraging people to think, if I tend to skew, which I know that, for example, I have a hard time with the sensorial, I remind myself, I need to push myself on that side. I need to actually take an active role of doing the curiosity in that exploring the world in that way, as opposed to just, just being, I can easily be intellectually curious and I can easily kind of tinker around and make. But the other two are the areas that I know that I'm a little weaker on. And so once you know where your default is and then you can kind of counteract it. And when you use that in innovation and foresight, I use it in foresight and innovation. If you have this intuition, it unlocks creativity. And so you can take a group of people and you can say, today, what's the group dynamic here? Where do you skew? And oftentimes you find the self-selection that we're all skewing in one or two ways, right? We go, okay, we got to push ourselves to think this way. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be, it might be fun, but it's uncomfortable. And then typically there's a waterfall of new ideas, very lateral thinking and kind of minds open up for the future. And you need creativity for foresight, right?
Right, I know. But I think the part that you also hit on, which is 2 things, right? Yes, you need diversity, but with that, you also need the comfort of dissent, which means that you also need the comfort of yourself, right? To be able to push into an area that you feel uncomfortable and sense in a way that you're not used to sensing, or being challenged by someone else's opinion that comes from a really diverse background, is not easy for folks to do, right? And so a lot of our work these days is as much as it can be really intellectual and all about AI and technology, I'm becoming more and more centered on the actual individual who's able to step into discomfort and invites it, as opposed to shuts down with it, and that we create cultures of room for dissent, right? Respectful dissent. I just think we're missing that piece.
Do you think that the work that you do, especially because it's human-centered and that part of the field and the craft needs to maintain itself? And my point is that do you think there'll be a way to? Do you think doing everything digitally is going to it's an easy transition. Oh, we'll just do everything that we were doing in a room, in a workshop. We're just going to do it digitally. Or do you think there's going to need to be new technology or new leap, like now, like you're going to be in VR rooms, or there's going to be some new kind of dynamic to be able to be in face-to-face?
Clearly. I mean, clearly, we know that we're just barely into this idea of being able to do things digitally, right? But I do think the fact is now, hopefully, we've got more confidence, because we were always told it was going to be too difficult, too expensive, too impersonal, too disruptive, too everything. And now that people have been forced into it for survival, right, from telemedicine to hopefully e-voting at some point, the fact that we're still voting the way we're voting is insane to me. And socializing and all that stuff. But then we're going to create better and better tools. We're going to see, to your point, where the gaps are and the breakdowns are, and figure out ways to do that. And then we are also going to have our other visceral stuff. Like, we've been thinking through, right before this call, I was talking to another girlfriend/mom friend of mine about how we will help our kids think about entering senior year of high school with new rituals. What is a new way of being able to do this? And it's not all going to be Zoom. Like, what will be a visceral thing where they can go and do something and mark their experience as this? So I do think it's going to be this combination, but we're going to come up with new ways of doing things. It's not going to be the same old way of doing any of it.
And new ways sensitive to the fact that these children are going to PTSD, like they're all the trauma of what's, many of these kids have experienced also the recession,
completely. I mean, think about how much they have experienced, right? I wrote a note to the graduating class of 2020 that was a bit more encouraging, but it's like they framed it as I started with 9/11 and I've ended up with a pandemic, and I'm like, yes, you are really groomed to be adaptive, right? You are really groomed to be sensitive to the change, because you've gone through climate change stuff, you've gone through violence in your schools, which is pretty dramatic, and now you're going through all of this stuff, and you've got the social upheaval. There's so much that they're holding. And so, yeah, for me, it's an outlet for them. We'll see if I can sell it to my daughter, but I was thinking that the parking lot at the school where the seniors get to park, that they would turn each of their spaces into a mural with chalk that represents them. Right?
That's a very cool.
Isn't that a cool idea?
But you can create it with them. Like, that would be fabulous. That's a fabulous co-creation opportunity to actually get them to figure out, build on that.
Oh, no, it should be them. Right? It should be theirs. I'm saying the idea is invite each of the seniors that have a parking space, and the kids that don't have parking spaces, because you would definitely want to make sure it's inclusive, have wall space somewhere, or can do it on the tennis courts, or do it wherever, do it on the street. But they would have a little place where they get to say, here's who I am, and this is what I'm passionate about and what I care about, and this is what the last 5 years have meant to me.
Personality.
Yeah, but the thing is, they create all these rituals for starting senior year in our school, and all those will be wiped out. And so, how can we figure out a way for them to still be able to, what's the plus thing that you could do now that you couldn't do before the pandemic? Right? And if you have empty parking lots, this is what you get to go do with that. So anyway, but I think that there's that kind of thing of creating, again, passion and curiosity and agency. Go and do something, right? That makes you feel as though you're actually have a chance to express who you are and have a chance to be in community with other people. So as much as we will have digital tools, we will still need those other pieces. Go do it. And actually, research from Adam Grant just came out this morning that the companies that have had stronger ties have strengthened them through digital technologies, and companies that had weaker ties have had weaker experiences with digital technology. So we've been talking all about this interpersonal and how important it is for innovation and trust and for all that stuff. And this is now, again, back to the data, right, is bearing it out. So we'll get better at this.
Well, yeah, and we also need, for the future of one of the predictions is that we need to focus quotient will probably be more important than IQ for sure going forward, being able to focus on things because of all the distractions we have, right? And even I think working at home and doing all this stuff, it's very challenging to be on a Zoom call all day long, right? And to be, back to back to back to back to meetings. And it was very funny is that normally you're in a meeting, your eyes can look like the horizon is not just right with the 16 inches in front of your face. Right. There's other things to look at in the room as you process information. Totally. But in this new, and so and
you're not always at the gauge of the teacher. I think again about for students, right? They're now the teacher sees them all here versus before you got to be in the back of the classroom, you got to be over here. Now you're full on.
Focus skills. I don't even I got to figure out that's a job of the future is a focus coach.
Yes, and no, I want to challenge that for 1 second and say, my oldest son is 23, who is an aerospace master's student, a very, very bright kid who's heading over to probably Lockheed Martin in January, literally triple times what he does everything. Where the video games, he's super fast. He said there's a Twitch stream that's on top of everything else that he sees in the world. He is not, you would not in any way think that he is a good focuser, even though he's an amazingly good thinker. And I think that part of it, we're putting a bit of our gaze onto their experience, and the fact is their experience is much more, it's multimodal and really fast, right? And that they're able to zone in on what they need to zone in on, but they are highly stimulative. Like Hugo needs so much stimulation in order to keep himself interested right now, which is why movies actually become very less entertaining for him. He's not really drawn to go to the movies.
Right, they're slow and they've got to cut. Right, they got to cut faster and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've been on Twitch for since it started, and so all the activity that happens, obviously with regard to commentary, music.
No, but I find it
like everything.
I'm a pretty fast thinker, and I find it dizzying, right? And I watch him play a video game, and how fast he's able to do the moves, and how much he wants to read it, and how can't come in fast enough, And I'm just like, wow, he's processing at such a high level. So much, and with layers.
Well, we also have to talk about the modes of processing. So that's what's interesting to me, because there's been research that comes out about partial attention deficit disorder, which is you're kind of skimming everything at a partial level. There was a book written about it sometime about partial attention deficit, which is when you do multitask, you do nothing well. And so unless we necessarily, it depends on what the problems are we're trying to solve, right? So I might not give Hugo a wicked problem to solve if he's doing all these things at one time. Or you might put him in a group with the people that for diverse thinking and have them attack it, right, in their way, in their mode, but have some other people who are going to attack it another. So I think we're learning about, neuroplasticity, right? Certainly, we just mapped the brain, in the past decade. So the idea is being able to figure out how do we learn about this brain of ours, and even for example the curiosity approaches. I'm sure that will be debunked and or layered on top of within a number of years as we get more information about how we learn, our learning styles and exploration styles. So it's an interesting space. What do you think about cyborgs?
Like them or don't like them, or think they will happen or don't happen, or want to be one or not be one? There's so many questions in that question.
Yeah, right, exactly. So if I had the opportunity, if you had the opportunity for a brain-computer interface and upload of your brain, sometime. So here's the choice. The choice is you'll have to die earlier to upload your brain. Okay, so we'll have to be within, let's say, 10 years. In 10 years' time, you get the opportunity of BCI, but then the BCI is forever. What's your choice?
You're saying
live a natural life, or
I have to give up real life for some of that.
You have to give up real life in 10 years from now. So you could have another 10 years, but then you have BCI and you'd live forever.
How much of my life am I getting? So for me, the cost-benefit analysis is how much of my life am I giving up? If I'm giving up 6 months, for sure. If I'm giving up 3 years, probably not. Right. So I think it depends on how much the cost is. I've been watching Upload. I don't know if you watch any Upload on HBO.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
Or Netflix, whichever one. I think it's HBO. Whatever. One of them. Amazon. But yeah, the fact that he dies at that moment, and he has to die a little, they have to make the decision of death sooner so they can capture his brain, versus they might have been able to save him, but maybe not. That's the thing that feels so scary around these choices. Are you willing to give up that moment of chance so that you might have made it?
It's trade-offs, right? It's really trade-offs, right?
Yeah. And I spent some time with Brian Johnson, who's inventing Kernel, which is the interface that goes into the brain. And Brian raises some really interesting questions. He really believes that that's the only way we're going to be able to stay, in top of our game with computers. But he also will talk about in the United States, we might decide that that's a terrible thing and outlaw, and another country might decide that it's a perfectly okay thing to do and encourage people to do it, and actually maybe even put it into the kids at birth, just like we vaccinate them. And then what kind of world will that be? Because we'll have such, again, distinctions and diversity, and not diversity, but polarization between the belief in this and not the belief in it. So we're going to be faced with some really hairy questions as we move through.
I think that's going to happen in my lifetime. I think we're going to have, and this has implications for insights, not just foresight, because as we look about segmentation of humans, you figure, I think we're going to have augs and nats, augmented humans and naturals. And I think you could imagine a time where there's potentially, even potentially legislation to reveal. If I'm competing in the Olympics and I've been augmented, don't I need to tell the other people? Should I really be competing against the natural humans that haven't been augmented? If I'm going for a job interview, there might be, and I can see this, there's this kind of Planet of the Apes stuff. But you can imagine class wars. You can imagine extreme competition, but you can also imagine states or parts of the world becoming bastions and islands for certain kinds of ideology. We already see that with states and cities in around the world. But I think it's very provocative as we get closer to this.
And it becomes a societal thing and a generational thing. So after that work with Brian, or that experience with Brian, then I was also invited into a sort of a, whatever you want to call it, a seminar, a symposium on ethics around this. And most of the people in that room were over 40. Very few were under 35, and almost nobody, I think, was under 30. So we had our own point of view. It should be discretionary. It should be when you're old enough to make a decision. It should be blah, 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 just like braces or cosmetic surgery or whatever else. And then I went home and told Hugo, actually, about this. He's like, are you kidding me? If my classmate got it at birth and I didn't, I'll be pissed. Right? Because that puts me at a disadvantage from day one. So like, no, man, like if it's going to be the norm, like do it at the beginning. So it's an interesting thing to see again, like how comfortable we're going to be with these technologies and how these kids are going to feel differently about it versus we're going to, and as a society, what we're comfortable with and what we trust and what we don't trust around that. So I
think an early signal is that we have parents who are already creating social media presences for their fetuses, right? So that's a choice. I've already made a choice to put my child, in this case, to give them a digital footprint that they may or may not want or whatever. And so there's already, I think that's the
versus the rest of us who think that we don't have the right to do that for our kids. We don't want to give them, we don't even post, their first pee and their first whatever because we think that that's an invasion of their privacy and we shouldn't be doing that from such. So we're going to have more of that kind of diverse perspective on what it is that we should be doing, which I go back to then, we're going to have to need room for understanding your point of view and my point of view and not judging it so harshly because we're going to get really judgy when this stuff happens. So can I ask you a question? So how do you feel about market research with Sims? Right? So if I can create an augmented version of me online, my digital twin, and you can go do research with that person, is that on your radar?
Well, Sims can be used in a host of different ways, right? So I could be using them as the proxy to you, or they could also be the researcher who could take the shape and form of the person they're researching so that there's more comfort level. So, there's all kinds of ways. Well, yeah, because
cool.
I might not be the the way I look and act is not appropriate for probably 99% of the world to do research with. So the point is that they're looking at avatars in insights. For me, is extremely provocative space. Really interesting. It's your AI researcher or AI insights executive or foresight executive. I think. Where I think what people, okay, so this is my prediction, and I was exploring this, and I would like to have another me, a sim that doesn't look anything like me. It's a Banksy of me. So in other words, it's going to do stuff that I want to do, but I can't do it because I have a job and I don't want to get arrested. You know what I mean? I really want an alternative. And now, of course, I could go to Second Life, I could go to Halo, I could build that and do that. But I really actually want a personality that could actually do public speaking and talk about be a provocateur. So I have been talking to several companies that specialize in building avatars recently, over the past actually year and a half, about this as an art project of coming up with some alternative egos here, or personas. And we're not there yet. Okay, because it takes management, but you can imagine there are already management agencies that are looking at this. I mean, I could imagine sometime in my lifetime that will be a thing where you do that, and that person has other experiences, and you're getting the benefit of those experiences and testing the waters. And in that case, I would like to try the other side of the ideology. So. Okay, so let's imagine I'm all for put the baby fetus on and start a social footprint and get that kid going with augmentation. But the responsibility I would have is a moral responsibility might be to take an avatar or sim and basically explore what it would be like if it's the other side.
Yeah.
And so
oh my God, that's brilliant. I love that. Yeah, we always talk about that we're using these technologies for empathy, but I didn't think about them from a foresight empathy perspective. If I continued on this path of choices, how would that feel moving forward?
Right.
That's awesome.
A path of choices. I don't know. I mean, let's build that together, because I think that'd be really fun to. So let me just tell you this thing, because maybe some of your viewers would appreciate it. There's a thing called the Future of Storytelling. I don't know if you've heard about this organization, and it's called Future of Storytelling, and you can go online and they do exhibitions and track narratives for storytelling. And of course, in this modern age, a lot of it centers around immersive and emerging technology for narrative or storytelling. And last year in the city, we went to an exhibition that they put on, and in that exhibition, we've all heard about put on a VR and you pretend like you're in a scenario. Half of us have all done it. I do it all the time. So I make VRs, videos, and I've got a bunch of headsets. But I hadn't done this, which is they had set up the physical environment to mirror the virtual environment. So I could put my hand on the table, and then that was the table in the VR. So the physicality was, in fact, so I could feel it. So then I was transformed to a young black man in the 1960s who was in a very terrible situation. And I looked down at my hands, and they're a black man's hands. Not only am I now race and I'm gender and time traveled, and I went through the most horrific experience, meaning empathetic experience of my life going through that. We all did. It was so powerful. We were like, this should be education for kids. Sure. This is this kind of immersive empathy through these kinds, but really feeling like you're stuck in the cell, stuck in the situation, and having the VR, and have it so that you are able to control it. Wow. So
that's what
I could imagine
hope.
that.
When I look at the things that I'm scared of in the future, those are the kinds of things that give me hope, because I think the same technologies that we can get very worried about the dystopian application of them also have all of these incredibly compassionate, empathetic, cultural ways of being able to hopefully curb some of our worst tendencies and our worst behaviors. So
I would love for to do some projects to see also if something like that could be used to get people to understand each other's perspective. Back to your point about the cultural tensions and the squealing, which I call the squealing.
No, I thought that was really fascinating, and we don't have time to talk about it right now, but I do encourage people to go to that TEDx talk, because I think your conversation around the squealing is a really, really important one that we need to pay attention to. And there's definitely something going on. So either we'll become Rome, and go, wow, that was a really amazing civilization back then, or we will figure out to use all this technology and evolved intelligence supposedly to get better at this and not put ourselves down that same road. So to round the corner then back to the curiosity work that you're doing, because I think that becomes the fuel that makes it possible for us to do all these things, right? Empathy is a big part. People always ask me how you prepare kids for the future, and I say that there's 5 things: curiosity, empathy, agency, grit, and then integrity, right? But curiosity is always at the top of the list, and I talk a lot about curiosity as being unique as your fingerprint. What I'm curious about is different than what you're curious about. It's different than what somebody else is curious about, and we need it all. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing to help us all improve our curiosity?
Yeah, sure. Culminating from a number of years of research. But so what I've started doing is I've got a diagnostic, which is a way to determine where you're skewing. Remember, we were talking about those 4 modes. Either I'm a looker, I'm a thinker, what I call the lickers, which are people who are sensory, or I'm a poker, right? I'm a maker, right? So, and it all squares up into an XY axis of like system 1, system 2, and things like that. But the point is that when we know, where we're skewing, and we can exercise it and be given some kinds of prompts and coaching to kind of push the boundaries, we find out it unlocks creativity, problem solving, and the capacity for foresight and futures. And when we look back at some of the great thinkers and also imaginers of the future, they actually are very well balanced in all 4 of the quadrants. I mean, it's not a good term, but it's like quadricurious. But you look at, and they have that balance. So that gives me, the energy to try to balance out my skews, and so forth. And I do find, having now done this now for years, that you can coach people and guide through, customized exercises or challenges and games and things like that you can actually change people's plasticity, and they actually explore the world differently. So, whether it's, curious dinner parties with all kinds of sensory experiences, or whether it's walking tours, or whether it's online curricula and things like that. But so that's what I've been employing in the foresight world and also in the insight world, both personally and professionally. And it's been really, really fun, because I think I certainly have the metrics to show it works. How much it works, I'm still trying to determine. It would be really wonderful to have. So I really need to have an FNIRS. FNIRS is the brain scans that are more portable than EEG. So I need access to some FNIRS to be able to kind of measure some brain activity. But we're pretty confident that sometime in the next year we'll be able to put together an experiment to actually show the plasticity of someone's brain as a result of going through some of these curiosity exercises and so forth. So that's my passion project. That's what I love to do.
Well, because I was going to say before, sorry, I interrupt you, but there's a piece of research that you also showed in that thing that did scare me, though, that 36%, I think it was, that said that they weren't curious about anything. Like, does this help also, like, sort of put the electric paddles onto someone's curiosity and kind of gin it up?
So thanks for mentioning that. So I do this benchmark research every year, right? And I do it with one of the artificial intelligence and motion recognition platforms, and we just completed it again last month. And unfortunately, we're in a curiosity recession, and I'm going to call it the curiosity. So what's happened is that I think it's fight or flight. I mean, look, there's technology, there's distraction, but people are shutting down and are. And there's a whole movement of, it's called, anti-intellectualism trend or movement. It's connected to this. And, I called it the mepidemic, I don't care, indifference, which is part and parcel of this particular, milieu. But I think it requires, thank you for reminding me, because I think it's like a existential risk. If we don't if we're going to find ourselves in Idiocracy, the movie Idiocracy is my favorite movie, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we're not going to have the chops intellectually or the muscles to be able to kind of sort ourselves out of some problems. And, the resilience that you talk about, I'm such a fan of your 5 principles, because I think those are great principles. I think that, the curiosity being part of that. So maybe there'll be someday, it'll be in curricula of schools. I don't know. It'd be interesting if it was a kind of a foil to some of the other.
Well, the fact that you can actually encourage that, right? The fact that you can find ways to stimulate that, because I think, to your point around any of this stuff, we have often engineered it out. It wasn't like we weren't born with it, right? But we've engineered it out, and so much of it in our schools is engineered out. My other son, Zane, and I had this long conversation one day about rubrics, and about the fact that they're taught very much to a very strict rubric, and if you don't measure these 5 things, and anything sort of fell, and either you fell outside that by just a margin, or you didn't hit all of them, then it's considered not successful. And I'm like, that does everything to discourage any kind of wandering with your brain, right? It is so then to make sure that you went to the game to get to that level of whatever. And so I think that we have done a really, really poor job of engineering a curriculum that right now in any way rewards or incentivizes. And we talk about it inside organizations. How do we incentivize curiosity inside organizations? What does it take to not just play the games, but also reward people for it? Like, if someone wants to go to a conference or take some time to go learn something or write something for their peers or whatever it is, that we don't shut that down and say that's not productive time.
Right. So. Well, I also think that your point is so well taken, because I think that obviously we're teaching to test, but we're a culture. A lot of cultures around the world reward the answer. And the correct answer, not the way you got to the answer, right? And so that's the critical thinking skills, right? Or the creativity of thinking. And it's about trivial pursuit. We all want to be at the factoids. We're looking for the snippet. We want to have the answer. So, and unfortunately, I think the focus on STEM has really, we've had a shift from humanities, and humanities, supports the debate of topics, philosophy, the way we get to things, the meaning of things, ethics. But, it's not getting to the binary of got the answer, didn't get the answer, right? Which is much of STEM is the binary, you either got the math or you didn't get the math, so, or, you understand the science or you don't. But so I think some of the shortcoming has also been our cultural preoccupation with STEM, which it's very important to have that, of course. But we also have to appreciate that we, need to focus on the humanities.
And the most prolific scientists and engineers, right, who are really good with math and science, were also some of the most creative thinkers.
You're right, right. They're all about musicians, like Brian Cox, the physician, physicist and, musician. That's like a great example of someone who's probably quadricurious, I'd say, but, we have a lot of Kumans out there for the kids, like Kuman mathematics and mathletes and stuff. But I think there's some of the softer skills, especially in the age of the digital era and the screen, right?
100%.
So
I will say, you ever heard of something called destination imagination?
I have. Tell me more about it, though. I have.
Well, just quickly, it's a competition, and it goes outside of school stuff, almost like if you did Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. But it's a club sort of thing that kids do, starting from kindergarten all the way through high school, in which there's an annual competition, and there's one of 5 categories that you can participate in, and you have to create a solution for it that lasts an X amount of minutes. So that's certainly a way of being able to stimulate curiosity. But the thing that's actually really cool is that they also have a thing called instant challenge. And you're also, get points as a team for how well you're able to do an instant challenge in 4 minutes or 8 minutes. And those things, Sarah, are fascinating. Sometimes they're more engineering related. Sometimes it's like they give you a table full of objects, and in 4 minutes, you as a team have to create an object that could be used by 2 professions and create a sales pitch for that.
I love it.
And so they just have to think on their feet really fast. And I kept thinking, if every classroom once a week did an instant challenge, imagine what that can unlock in these kids' brains.
Yeah.
Right? It just, to your point, the plasticity of knowing that you can get in there and you can play with something. You have to figure out how to get pretzels from the center of a thing with these materials. Like, you just have to, it's ingenuity and problem solving, but done, it's a doing. And if you just did it over and over and over and over once a week, imagine how the brain would change. So.
Oh, wow. That would be wonderful to introduce that. I have a personal concern that there's also, unfortunately, a social deficit or inaccessibility to some of this stuff. Yeah. So we have the digital divide, right? So unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are left in the lurch with this entire moving to digital. Like, not everyone's doing Zooms, right? And what you just described, if we could get that to out to all communities,
technically,
not just right,
totally 100%. And the idea is and there's some that are like, give me 18 uses for peanut butter other than eating it. Like, you just have to come up with stretch your brain, so it doesn't require any material.
Glue,
right?
Yeah.
But the right is, it doesn't require materials, it doesn't require technology, it doesn't require anything other than a coach to come in and ask you that question and give you some space to come up with the answers, right? And so I think that there's a lot of room for this advocacy that you have and this passion that you have to be able to go and do it. So I feel like we're sort of out of time. The only thing that we didn't get to talk about, if you want to just do a quickie little thing, is like, how does this stuff, we often think about that these are futurists and curiosity seekers outside of the corporate world, right? But you are in the corporate world doing this, right? Are we seeing an appetite inside corporate America for this kind of thinking and this kind of growth, right? We're recognizing its value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's been an increase of futures fluency, first of all, at the C-suite. So, everyone talks about the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? So, like, that's now parlance. So I think that the C-suites have started this has now become a legitimate concept of preparedness planning, crisis management, and futures foresight thinking. Okay, so that's first of all. So it's the futures, if you will, fluency. But then there's now a focus on, I think, futures fitness, which is how are we prepared with our fitness in this space? And it's not just within the corporation I'm with right now, but the other many corporations in my previous role, my previous job. That it's being taught in the business schools. So leaders of today and tomorrow now are coming out with the expectation that we have to have some capabilities here. They call it different things, and that's important to know. Like, sometimes it's just the issues management or crisis management function. Okay, sometimes it's strategic planning. Sometimes it's futures and foresight, strategic foresight. Sometimes it's perspective. So in French, it's called perspective. So you have to be careful that, sometimes we're all talking the same language, but it can be in different functions under legal, finance, operations, corporate communication. So that's very exciting for people that they can enter in different ways. And I do think that, what's very exciting for me moving into the corporate world is I made the transition from most recently the agency, professional foresight agency space to the corporate, was because I wanted to make change within a giant multinational corporation that I could make enormous impact. So just by, even if it's one thing that I say that we need to be aware of, to, about the future and issue and so forth. And of course, there's many things that we've brought to the light that have helped to shape the strategy and the operation of the company. I feel like it's very beautifully catalytic. And so, it's different. You get different reward. You want to have you're like spreading the seed and having impact on lots of entities, right? Across categories, which is also huge catalytic force, right? And I'm taking a giant megalith and saying, okay, we're going to make change within that organization and steer that to do the right thing and do that.
I think it's extraordinary.
Futures
I
and
really
so forth.
applaud what you do, because I tried that for a while and I'm just not as successful at it because I get really frustrated and I'm not as good at the systems part of it. But I think that your data science background and your natural proclivity to show like that it's not just, because again, I think I'm in some ways, my intuitive nature doesn't work as well inside a corporate setting for long term. It's good to come in and fly her in and see what she has to say and then fly her out. But I think that you bring such a science to it, and or a trustworthy perspective around it that I do think it makes it easier for organizations to lean into it. So I really applaud the work. I would have
to say, as an absolute a teachable moment, what you just said is that if you are inside an organization, and especially if it's a publicly listed organization with shareholders, there will be an expectation that there is a data. There's lots of data. So you have the patent analysis behind your recommendations. You have the research papers that have been published in the past decade to support your point. You have the cultural signals. You have venture capital. You have data to support it, because everything is data driven in terms of the mechanisms of the company. So there is a great appreciation for the yin and yang of these both worlds. So we use futurists like yourself all the time who have a network of humans, the human network, and the intuitiveness to as in addition to what the hard science can show. And those are the two strategies that are used. So there's much more closer knit with data analytics for sure. For sure, in that because of this, the beast of the nature, the nature of the beast and the
and I think that I'm just writing this piece right now about being status fluid, and I think that is to the future, right? Because right now we also define people as like you're in and I'm out, and the reality is that we are going to be more fluidly going across these membranes.
I love that,
right? Yeah. For sure, and the fact that you do work that isn't just the paid work, all the other work that you do for the things that you're inventing and the things that you're advocating for and the things that you spend your time on are also work. And so this thing I'm talking about is that we need to really redefine what work is, and we need to be able to make that invisible value more visible, so that we are actually as a society encouraging that curiosity, right? We're not just putting people through the lens to be able to get to a job that may or may not exist 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and thinking about it much more broadly. So I think this work that you do is so important on this really big scale, because I think that as a society, right, we do need to, and we can't be in a meh world. And we certainly, employment is going to shift and change. Our fluidity around it is going to shift and change. And our reliance on a job to provide all our needs is going to shift and change. So what would be the thing? And so I worry that if we don't teach this in schools in a way that kids would naturally continue to expand their curiosity, we're going to end up in a very, very scary society. So this work.
Yeah, I agree. So it's existential from that perspective. These softer skills in that respect. So I look forward to collaborating with you more on all of this. This will be super fun.
I know, it's so fun. I know we go from we should go on vacation together, so that we should go start a company and go create 7 inventions together. Like I love the fact that it runs.
Let's build some avatars
and
do bad things.
I know.
Okay.
Well, thank you for so much of your time, Sarah. Really, really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
I will tease that people will need to listen to this on half speed, because you and I are like. But I love that we are able to have this conversation, and we will definitely find each other again more.
Big supporter of the society, and let's get more female brains into this society. I think that women just come at foresight so differently, and especially are so able to see culture. I think there's a particular knack for culture, and it all, as I just said, maybe I'm biased because my foresight work started in the cultural space, in multicultures overseas.
Food and fashion and family and so many of these things that are fundamental to our worlds are interestingly often really left off the table in some of these conversations. And so, and we just fill each other in. I just think that what we're asking in the society is to build a society of everyone who cares about this stuff, men and women, to hear the women's voices. right? That just to
Right.
bring them into to the table, just expand the table. So
And it is a STEM industry that is usually not known to be a STEM industry.
true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you take the data science side of things, so some people who might be interested in exploring their STEM bent, this is completely, at least my team are all STEM folks,
Yeah.
From that perspective.
no, totally
But,
the way that you're doing.
yeah.
I'm curious actually to know about the two platforms that you use. So I don't know if you want to say that publicly or
Sure. One is called Quantify, QNTFY, Quantify. You can find them online. And the other is Heartbeat AI. And they're two different platforms with different processes, both very, very powerful artificial intelligence with neuroscientists and psychologists behind them, and a lot of proof over years of machine learning. They do very different things, but they can be used to recognize the underlying intent and emotion, to read sentiment and emotion, and try to unpack what people are saying, and to predict future intention. So that's the ultimate goal, is obviously to get ahead of things.
fascinating. If I had to do it all over again, that's probably where I would spend some time in my learning, because I just think that blend is just so fascinating. So, all right, sister, I will let you go, even though I could keep you forever. And so have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Same here.
And
have a good one.
we will stay in touch.
My pleasure.
Thanks, honey.
Okay, have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks, Nancy. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.